Welcome back. I'm going to start us off with Isaiah 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings, and 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the threshold shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me! I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. And he said, Go and say to this people, Keep listening, but do not comprehend. Keep looking, but do not understand. Make the mind of this people dull, and stop their eyes and shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes, and listen with their ears, and comprehend with their minds, and turn and be healed. Then I said, How long, O Lord? And he said, Until cities lie waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is utterly desolate, until the Lord sends everyone far away, and vast is the emptiness in the midst of this land. Even if a 10th part remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak, whose stump remains standing when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump.
So the question that we're supposed to start with is, consider what sovereign means in your everyday life. Do you believe you have yielded sovereignty to God? If not, why? If yes, do you also trust his sovereignty? What does sovereign mean to you?
Well, so sovereign, I would say, means to me is, whenever I think of sovereign, I think of, like royalty almost. I think of, a ruler, somebody who is in charge and in control of, a nation or whatever, a place, something like that. That is what comes to my mind when I hear of sovereignty. When it comes to the question of, do I believe that I've yielded sovereignty to God? Well, my very honest answer to this is that depends. It really depends on the situation and the thing. I said in our previous video that, that giving up control is something that I do struggle with, and that is very true. So in certain areas of my life, I would say I'm very good at having God be sovereign. In others, it's a little bit of a wrestling match.
I think that's honest. I think most people would say, oh yeah, I have done that, but not absolutely, positively, totally every minute of every day,
Right.
We still have our moments when we still want to be the person in the driver's seat, flying the plane, or whatever you want to say. We want to be in charge sometimes, but sovereign means letting God be in charge all the time.
Right. So our next question starts with a passage from Hebrews 13, 7 through 8. Remember your leaders, consider the outcome of their way of life, and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. So are there people in your life who believed in the steady hand of God when they had much to be anxious about, and how did it turn out for them? And how might their examples affect your capacity for trusting God's sovereignty? And I have a very specific kind of example that I think of and thought of as soon as I sort of read this question. When I was a senior in high school, not a senior at this point. I would have been a junior. When I was a junior in high school, sorry, I had my dates mixed up. It's been a very long time.
Not as long as me.
That is true. when I was a junior in high school, one of my really good friends was diagnosed with cancer. And watching him go through all of that was really a very great testimony to me, just of everything. He had an incredible amount of calm, kind of going through it. Like, you would never really, without him talking about like what he was experiencing and occasionally missing out on youth group and church, you wouldn't have known. And it's something that I really just kind of think back about, because he had a very honest and firm belief that God was going to carry him through it. And so, when I think of that, I think that an example in terms of affecting my capacity for trusting in God's sovereignty, it does definitely help. He was able to get through it. I mean, kind of the tragic side of this is that he did eventually pass away. But he did, during that kind of initial phase, he really went through it in just a really incredible way. It's something that you would never necessarily think about, and especially at his age, because at that time he was a senior, he was preparing to try to go to college, and he's having all of this, and he's missing out on all these different things that were such a strong part of his life. So that's for me. What about you, Sarah?
Well, there's a number of people who kind of, their calmness in the face of life's disasters, if you could call it, really taught me that if we put our trust in God. When my father was passing, he got the word from the doctor that needed to think about going into hospice, which was not something that had been said just a month before, and now suddenly we're talking about hospice. Thinking about him passing, he was totally fine with it. Mm-hmm. He was looking forward to the next chapter in his life. There were people he wanted to meet in heaven, and questions he wanted to have answered that couldn't be answered here on earth. And so, knowing that he went through this and said, I'll get the answers I want, and, I'll see you in a couple years, hopefully a very long time, really trusting that God is in control made a huge difference in how I face every day now. There's ups and downs. I have twins, I have a husband, I have a job, I have aging relatives, but just understanding that if I let God be in charge, it'll be much better. Mm-hmm. So you want to read this famous chapter from Hebrews, chapter 11.
So the last part of this question is I'm going to read Hebrews 11, and I want you all to, at home, listen and just meditate on what is being said. And I am going to warn you in advance, this is a little bit of a lengthy chapter, so it'll take me a little bit to get through this, but we'll all get through this together. All right, so Hebrews 11. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Indeed, by faith our ancestors received approval. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible. By faith Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain's. Though this he received as approval as righteous, God himself giving approval to his gifts, he died. But through his faith he still speaks. By faith Enoch was taken so that he did not experience death. And he was not found because God had taken him. For it was attested before he was taken away that he had pleased God. Without faith it is impossible to please God, for whoever would approach him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith Noah, warned by God about events as yet unseen, respected the warning and built an ark to save his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir to the righteousness that is in accordance with faith. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. and he set out not knowing where he was going. By faith he stayed for a time in the land, and he had been promised, as in a foreign land, living in tents, as he did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith he received power of procreation, even though he was too old, and Sarah herself was barren. Because he considered him faithful who had promised, therefore from one person, and this one as good as dead, descendants were born, as many as the stars of heaven, and as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. All these died in faith without having received the promises, but from a distance they saw and greeted them. They confessed that they were strangers and foreigners on the earth, for people who speak in this way make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of the land that they had left behind, they would have had the opportunity to return. But as it is, they deserve a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God. Indeed, he has prepared a city for them. By faith Abraham, when put to the test, offered up Isaac. He had received the promises, was ready to offer up his only son, of whom he had been told, "It is through Isaac the descendants shall be named for you." He considered the fact that God is able even to raise someone from the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. By faith Isaac invoked blessings for the future on Jacob and Esau. By faith Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave instructions about his burial. By faith Moses was hidden by his parents for 3 months after his birth, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called a son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to share ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered abuse suffered for the Christ to be greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, unafraid of the king's anger, for he persevered as though he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land, but when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had received the spies in peace. And what more should I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection, others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, and in caves and holes in the ground. Yet all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so that they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. So that is a very lengthy chapter, but that's kind of the point, because you even see there the author of Hebrews kind of gives up on the listing out everybody who lived by faith. So with that, how did these stories conclude? And was trusting in God worth it for them? Why or why not?
Well, each of the stories concluded with the promises of God being fulfilled.
Right.
It was a good conclusion. Was trusting in God worth it for them? In the long run, yes. I'm certain that, Abraham out there in the middle of nowhere being told he's got an aged wife who hasn't had any children yet, going to have a baby, that would be a little challenging.
Yes, I would imagine.
But God gave them a child. Was it worth it? Yeah. So how do we use these stories as ammunition against anxiety?
Well, I think, when you see that all these individuals of great faith, and people that we tend to revere very highly, especially as we're reading scripture, and you see what they went through, it does kind of put in perspective what you yourself in your life is going through. And you can take from that if God was able to work in those situations and bring about good results, and he's definitely going to be able to work in your own. One of the things which I am thinking about this, because the faith of Abraham was mentioned, and I'm currently doing a series talking about Abraham and kind of comparing that sort of anxiety of sacrifice that he himself had going with Isaac to Jerusalem, as well as the anxiety that Jesus likely had heading to the cross. And I think it's important for us to kind of remember those types of things, that these individuals that were revered, they did have similar anxieties as us. They went through real hardship, and God got them through it at every single time. And I think you can take those kind of experiences and say, if God was able to, provide in those situations, he's going to be able to provide in our own life.
I kind of said bad things happen, but good things happen more often.
That can be the case. Or at least greater good things can also happen.
Greater good things happen, yes.
So we got one final question. Your anxiety decreases as your understanding of your Father increases. Putting this thought into practice, in what ways can you pursue a deeper understanding of what God is? What intentional changes can you make in your daily schedule to ensure that God's character is at the forefront of your mind? How would your demeanor change if you would dare to believe that good things will happen?
I would change my daily schedule. I start my day with a devotional. So if my first thoughts are of God, then it's a whole lot easier to think of him more often during the day. If I skip the devotional a day, I realize that it's a long time in the day before I start to think maybe God should be more in control than me. And, if I dare to believe that good things will happen, it makes going through the bad things a whole lot easier.
Right.
I had twin preemies at 30 weeks. Lots of things could have gone wrong. But I dared to believe that good things would come about. And now I have twin, almost 23-year-olds who are employed and in school and figuring out life on their own, which is a whole lot different perspective than thinking you gave birth to 30-week-old kids.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, I think the biggest thing just for gaining a deeper understanding of God, there's, the word is discipline. And there's this idea of Christian disciplines, and those are things like, reading your Bible, meditating on the Word, prayer, fasting, those types of things. Practicing those and practicing them regularly is the best way. One of the things I kind of want to get in the habit of doing more often is actually fasting. I know traditionally there have been individuals who have observed a Tuesday fast. I believe John Wesley did as well, if I'm remembering correctly.
A couple days a week and half days and a variety of things.
Yeah. So, and that's something which I kind of think about. A, it's actually decent for your health, believe it or not. But also B, it's a way to kind of make sure that regularly on the week, like each week, you're definitely dedicating time for God at those sort of moments. So that's just something for me. So with that, Sarah, I'm going to go ahead and have you close us for this week with the meditation.
With our meditation. This week it's the prayer of St. Patrick. I arise today through the strength of heaven, light of the sun, splendor of fire, speed of lightning, swiftness of the wind, depth of the sea, stability of the earth, firmness of the rock. I arise today through God's strength to pilot me, God's might to uphold me, God's wisdom to guide me. I arise today through the mighty strength of the Lord of creation.